Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to build, 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 this time power, this time to build power, this time to build power, this time to build power.
What's up, everybody? I'm your host, Chris Hampton.
And this is Nate Drolet.
And I'm sitting here in Lander, Wyoming, where it's quite snowy. I think we got 24 inches. Sink's got 28 or something like that. And the plague hit me at the same time. So I am stuffy and leaking from my face at the moment, which is not the most pleasant thing.
No.
How are you?
I'm doing okay. Snow hit us, not to that degree. Fortunately, no sickness has hit me, though I need to get my flu shot. I feel like everyone around me has not been getting it and has been getting sick. So,
yeah, totally. I mean, that's what happened here. Like, I live in a petri dish now.
Yeah.
You know, Harper going to daycare. Annalisa works at the elementary school. So it's just like I'm bombarded with the plague every day.
Yeah.
How's the YouTube going?
Man, it's been going well. People have been super nice. Had some really great responses to things. Yeah, I'm excited about it. Just kind of, this is a new medium for me, like creating video, editing, doing all of that. So been just kind of taking my time trying to figure out, how to make everything work. Some of the best advice I got was, step one, literally just put out 100 videos and try and make one thing better every single time. So right now, that's my first goal. So I'm trying to put out roughly one a week, though if I feel like something needs a little more work, I'm okay with every other week.
Yeah, totally. That's cool. I've heard from other people that the people on YouTube who are consuming YouTube are nicer than other social media platforms.
They've been so wonderful
several times.
Yeah, it's been great. And I asked for feedback and I would love feedback. Man, and people have been great as far as just saying, hey, I think your editing could change in this way, or have you considered this? Someone told me I needed to water my plant behind me. It's great. People have been lovely. So yeah, also if you're watching it, feel free, give me feedback. My goal is to just try and keep making this a little better each time. And I'm fully open to it.
Yeah, that's cool. I've put out a ton of stuff on YouTube, but I've never really leaned into the platform. And maybe it's because people are nice and I sort of like, being a dick now and then. So maybe I don't belong on YouTube. I don't know.
Yeah, I could totally see that. Cause I feel like from knowing you, I feel like you are someone who likes, criticism. Like you like being critiqued and you like the pushback. And I think not everyone.
I like being the sleeping bear that gets poked. I don't need to poke the bear, but I like when people poke at me.
Yeah, I can tell. But yeah, so it's been good. I'm excited about it. I've got a bunch of things I'm really amped for. Right now, I'm essentially going through a syllabus. I've got 220 individual bullet points that I think are worth covering. So I'm doing little short summaries of each, and then I'll go through and essentially go through those. I think in total I've got maybe 450 video ideas right now.
Cool.
So I've got enough to keep me busy for a few years at the minimum. Awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah.
I'm glad you're leaning into it. It's fun to watch from the sidelines.
Thanks. Appreciate that.
Yeah. And I think today we're probably not going to get as nerdy as some of your videos, but I think we're probably going to get a little nerdy today. Why don't you tell everybody what we're talking about?
Today we're talking about we're talking about Hangboard protocols that work. I went into this, I texted you maybe like a week and a half ago. I was like, hey,
You were like, no, I'm serious.
yeah. I was like, we should do an episode on Hangboard protocols at work. And then immediately followed up, like, I'm actually serious. And the reason I said that, like, so if you look for information on hangboarding, there's kind of a few categories that exist right now. One that's really common is people say, hey, literally just do anything. Be consistent, show up, give some intensity. It doesn't matter what you do. Which, look, I get and I understand in principle, but a lot of people want information and they're going to see that, eyes glaze over. Even if that is good advice, people are going to pass it up.
Yeah.
Then you see people give very thorough explanations of the principles behind strength training, behind recovery, behind hangboarding, what we know, what we don't know, things like that. And that, I think, is something that we've always tried to lean towards a little bit. And there are other people, I think Lattice has done a really nice job of, they'll put out 30-minute videos walking through all these principles. And while this is nice too, I think there are issues with this as well. I mean, once again, some people just want to be told what to do. They're going to see a 30-minute video about principles that doesn't say do this. They're like, cool, next, again. Then you have the last category, more or less, and that is just blanket protocols. And I think, once again, a few people I think have done a good job. Like, I like to give credit where credit's due. I think Lattice has actually done a good job of just giving some blanket protocols. A few other people have, but there's a lot out there. When I texted you this, like,
extra lot.
There was an extra lot. Like, when I texted you this, whatever it was, like a week and a half ago, I was like, I think this would be great. And I was very optimistic about where I wanted to see this go. And then in the last 48 hours, I was like, you know what? I'm going to start Googling how to start hangboarding. What is the best hangboard protocol? And I'm going to read all these articles. And I'm going to watch all these videos.
Wow, you're a fucking glutton.
Like, do you remember in The Fifth Element, the scene where the female protagonist, is it Lulu?
I don't remember her name.
She gets reanimated and she's just like, oh, I need to learn human culture and how to communicate and everything. So she gets on what is essentially the internet, and she's like she's speed running human everything, like just trying to learn. And then in this, she sees all the atrocity that man has wrought upon itself and the earth, and she just starts breaking down emotionally. This is how I felt reading these articles. Like, I was just like, oh my God, like, and especially for beginners, like and I get it. Here's the thing. I Googled, how do I get stronger fingers? How do I hangboard? Hangboard for beginners, all this. Great SEO. Like, man, stuff goes to the top of Google. I clicked it. And I mean, everything is contradictory. A lot of this is just throwing shit at the wall. Like, it was upsetting to see. So there's a lot of that. Once again, I think there are some people who put out good, useful protocols, but it's something that we've never done, and I felt like there was some use in that. And the reason why I think this is important, and why I think that just giving blanket principles isn't always the best thing, kind of stems from this book that I recently came across. That it's a really interesting book, and that it's very niche in one way, but I think the idea behind it is very universal. So the book is called Make the Bread, Buy the Butter. It's by a woman named Jennifer Reese. And in this book, she makes literal this idea of, is the juice worth the squeeze? So in 2008, during the recession, she loses her job. Her husband's still working. They've got kids. And she's like, well, we got to save money. And she kind of has this inspiration at one point. I think she was a blogger already at that point. But she had this inspiration to see how much, like, what is it actually like to make all your own food? So this is making your own ingredients, making your own recipes, having your own chickens and goats, all of these things. And so she went through this big, long kind of experiment and recorded along with it to see, is this worth it? When is it worth it? When are you better off just buying the thing versus actually making it yourself. Because a lot of times you would assume, hey, make it yourself. Like that's the way to go. And she ended up writing a whole book around this in 2012. And there's a couple of factors she looked into to differentiate between, is this worth it? Her, the overall decision was make it or buy it. So first off was cost difference. Are you actually saving money by making it yourself? In some cases, you save a ton of money. In a lot of cases, it was about even. Sometimes you just, because you don't have economies of scale, you couldn't do it better yourself. Second one was, how much hassle is it to do it well? Like, sometimes it's just like, oh, this is a lot of work to do. Yeah, you can do it well and you can do it cheap, but man, this is a ton of work. Maybe it takes a lot of expertise to do it well. So it might take you 8 or 9 or 10 iterations. And then you're like, ooh, I'm locked in. This is great. But you're messing up a lot at that point. And then, is it easy to get wrong? Like, once again, same idea. The next one, and this was kind of a tiebreaker for her, was, is it enjoyable for you? Like, there are plenty of things where it was like, hey, like the cost isn't that much different. Honestly, the taste isn't that much different. And all these different things. But, if you like it, yeah, do it. That's great. Which I think is important. And the very last thing, and I think this is where things really tie together, is there actually a quality difference? Because sometimes, you make something yourself and wow, this is so much better. You grow your own tomatoes versus buying cheap grocery tomatoes. My goodness, it's worth the work. But if there isn't a quality difference, cost is all the same, everything's the same, man, just buy it. So you may be wondering, how does this tie into rock climbing?
I'm not wondering at all, because I'm the type of person who, if there was buttered toast that I could just put in the toaster, I would buy it.
Yes. So here's the thing. I don't
want to make anything.
I think in rock climbing, hangboarding is the pre-buttered toast. Hangboarding is a supplemental exercise. Most of your finger strength should be coming from climbing itself, and there are great ways to do it. Not only that, so if we look at, like, is there a quality difference as well to being hyper obsessive, learning everything about hangboarding and like everything about anatomy, physiology, all these things, and understanding all the protocols, making your own decisions, designing your own programs? Is there actually a quality difference between that and just saying, oh, I trust these people, I'm going to follow their program blindly? I don't believe there's a significant difference. And if there is a significant difference, I think it gets outweighed in your actual climbing performance by the cost, which is, look, we only have so much time and energy to think about climbing. Like, this is something that's funny to me. I'll be coaching, and a common thing that people will say to me is, if I explain a new idea to them, I'll say, hey, here's this concept. I think it'll really help you. There's this phrase that people keep saying to me, and they'll be like, man, I've never thought of that. And that seems so interesting because I think about climbing a lot. And immediately my first thought is, okay, well, what do you think about when you think about climbing? And I would argue that when you think about climbing, the things you obsess about all day, if you're thinking about hangboard protocols, if you're thinking about how to make your fingers stronger, what grip position is going to work the best, if that's where the bulk of your mental energy is going towards in this massively complex sport, man, your climbing performance is going to suffer.
Yeah.
Like, you are not doing yourself any justice with that mindset, like with just hyper focusing on this. Because let's say even if you get 10% better finger strength gains from your hangboard protocol, you're losing so much. Not only that, like, you're also, if we look at the research around people who become hyper focused on optimizing things, they're more likely to second guess what they're doing. They're going to change what they're doing more often. Like, they're also more, ironically, even though they'll tend to get slightly better results, they tend to be less satisfied with the results they're getting because they're so hyper focused on them, compared to people who, so it's this idea of optimizers versus satisficers, people who just look for a satisfactory level, something where if I were to ask you, Kris, how do you feel about your hangboarding? And you said, I feel good about it. that's good enough. Like the people who shoot for that, they end up being much happier with the results. They may not get quite as good results, but we also have to look at in the entire world of climbing performance, how much does hangboarding itself actually push the needle in your performance? It's like it pushes some, but not enough for you to make that your sole focus, or even like for it to take any large chunk of your mental energy away.
Yeah, I agree. And that's why when you first texted this, I had my finger on the eye roll emoji when the second text, I'm actually serious, came in. And I was like, okay, we'll see what happens.
Yeah. And so earlier I said, I was kind of listing off the author Jennifer Reese's criteria for make it or buy it. Is this worth it? And one that I think is important, I will bring up now is this enjoyable? Because here's the thing, like there's a lot of people and a lot of people who listen to our podcasts who are essentially hobbyist sports scientists. They love reading research. They love reading about different sports, different training applications, all these things. It's a hobby for them. Like
let's qualify some things here. I think most of the hobbyist sports scientists out there, and I'm not trying to throw shade, I'm just being like, I really think this is the case, that they just listen to someone talk on Instagram who says they're a scientist and then they just buy it. Most people, that's what I think happens.
Yeah. I mean, and I agree. I think it's because it is hard. Like you have to have a pretty large base of knowledge to be able to be critical of different sources of information. There's a reason why so many people will, let's say, listen to Andrew Huberman and be like, oh, I love this scientific podcast. But if you listen to anyone who is a doctor, who is a clinician or a researcher, they're pretty quick to be like, he's a neuroscientist and I'll listen to him about neuroscience, but man, he really oversteps his bounds the second he gets outside of that. Yeah. But you have to have the education to be able to recognize this. But either way, I mean, I think like there are people who do some really deep dives, and like I like talking with people who are super nerdy about training, who get into this. And if that's your hobby, man, go for it. Do I think that if your goal is just climbing performance, I don't think being a hobbyist sports scientist is actually going to be benefiting you as much as you think. It's the same thing. I love making really fancy coffee. And I would say, most of the steps I take, is it really moving the needle that much on me getting a better cup? Probably not. I could probably do a third of what I do and still have a wonderful cup of coffee. But it's okay. Like to me, this is like a fun hobby. So I'm okay with it. And I think that the thing is with climbing, there's just so much that goes into it that if we become hyper obsessive about one avenue, we only have so much time. We only have so much ability to process and think about things. We're absolutely dropping the ball somewhere else, whether that is mental training, whether that is tactics, whether that's technique, whether that's just, hey, how do I optimize other aspects of my life so that I have more time to go climbing outside on rock?
Yeah.
Like that's a good use of time for sure.
Yeah. I think most people these days fall into the category of overly focused on finger strength.
Yeah. And like I said, if this is a hobby for you, cool. That's fun. Go for it. I completely understand. Like as a coach, this is an avenue I like to dive down. But I also recognize I don't think if I just wanted to be an athlete, this would not be productive for my actual bottom line performance of how hard do I climb.
Yeah.
I think, in my opinion, make it or buy it. Hangboarding, buy it. Find someone you trust, take their protocol, copy and paste. Use some basic understanding to tailor it to yourself. But I mean, goodness, you shouldn't spend more than an hour every phase, say every 3 months of planning out what you're going to do for the next 3 months.
Yeah, no question.
All right. So yeah, that's my opening monologue.
Okay.
So let's go ahead, and I figure we can kind of go through protocols that we've seen work. And for these, a lot of these, I mean, we've seen work for hundreds, if not thousands of people. Like, these are tested methods. And if they're not, well, we will obviously explain why they're still included. And then I figured along the way we can also include some common mistakes that we end up seeing. So yeah, would you like to start?
Okay. Sure. One of the things I really like, which is a relatively new thing in the climbing world, but for me personally, and for a lot of the people I've programmed it for, it seems to be a great way to keep your fingers pretty healthy. It's not the sexy, like, oh, look how much weight I'm hanging kind of a hang, but the long duration hangs, the 20 to 30 seconds sort of finger health sessions, or tendon health sessions. Some people call them density hangs. I'm not a fan of that term, simply because density is a means too many things when you're talking about physical training.
It's something that has existed in sports science for a long time, and it has represented something else.
Yeah, exactly. So my fingers just feel generally better when I'm doing a few body weight hangs like that semi-regularly, whether it's during warm-ups or whatever. Hanging for 20 to 30 seconds, a few of those hangs, and my fingers just feel healthier. And I almost always have people who have, like, chronic finger, I won't say injury, because if it's injury, we go a whole different route. But if it's like tweaks, or their fingers always feel a little compromised, we do those relatively regularly. And pretty soon they're like, oh, I haven't noticed my fingers feeling compromised in 2 months. And that's
nice.
It's the first time that's happened since I started climbing. So I really like those. They're not sexy, but I like them.
They're not, but no, that's great. I'll actually kind of skip to one. I've got one that's along a similar vein, but I'll say of all of mine, this is the one that is the least. It's the one I've used with the least clients, but I've heard another coach talk about it, and I'll explain that here in a minute. And this is, I call it just a multi-grip block workout. So I have, a couple years ago, I got COVID really bad. I was in bed for like 4 weeks. And at some point I just got, like, if I moved around too much, I would get really, like, dizzy and sick and nauseous. So at one point I was like, okay, I've got a 15-pound dumbbell next to me. and I've got a tension block. I'm just going to start, like, grabbing it in different grips. So, like, open hand, half cramp, full cramp, different pocket grips, super light. But I was like, I just need to do something to keep sane. And I ended up doing that for almost the full 4 weeks. And when I got back to climbing, it was the most interesting thing. My hands felt fine. Like, I felt like I could have hit my max numbers that day, but my full body was, like, really shaky and rusty. So everything I wasn't moving felt, like I had taken a month off away from climbing. My hands felt no different, and I was using 1/10 of my body weight for these hangs. And I've had a couple clients who, they will go on long trips, things like that. And I'll be like, hey, grab a block. And, like, if there's a dumbbell in the hotel lot, like hotel gym, whatever, just, like, set a 15-minute timer, go through a bunch of different grip positions. Like, and it just keeps things feeling good. Like, and your hands feel good in a well-rounded way. And this is something that if life gets busy and I'm not going to be able to get a session in, I may, or before I had a Hangboard, like, I would go out, like, I just have a block that lives on my front porch now with a 15-pound plate sitting or connected to it. And I was like, oh, this really works for kind of filling in the gaps so that you don't feel rusty. And interestingly, and it was one of those things where I was like, I don't know. This is something I don't really want to talk about because it just doesn't feel, I don't have much basis around it. And then, comically enough, I was listening to an interview with Ollie Tor, and he's, like, just recently, a few weeks ago, and he was like, I found this thing recently that like I can't really explain why it works, but essentially with all of his like very high level competitors that he'll work with, he'll have them do body weight repeaters where you're just going through a whole mix of grips, like different pockets, different edges, different things. Body weight, super easy, like nothing hard.
Yeah.
And he was like, and it just makes your fingers feel better. Like you don't feel rusty. And he basically said exactly what I had been noticing for the last, 2 years while using this and incorporating it. Once again, this isn't sexy. I don't think this is something that's going to boost your strength. But if you have gaps of time, like today's my last day of a deload week. I did it probably 4 or 5 times throughout this deload just because like my climbing's super light, but I wanted to keep my fingers feeling good in different grips. It's a nice little supplement add-in that you can just throw in 15 minutes.
Yeah, I think there's a misconception about how little it takes to keep your fingers, to maintain your fingers. Lots of people think it needs to be this, super well thought out, optimized program that you do all the time, including through all your performance time, and you never stop training your fingers. And
yeah.
And I think I think that's one of the mistakes. You said you wanted to talk about some mistakes here. I think one of the mistakes is not taking into account your climbing when you're planning your hangboarding. Because like you said in the beginning, you can still gain a lot of finger strength climbing. Most people can. I would argue that even, like a Will Bosey type character is probably still gaining some finger strength through his climbing because his fingers are so strong that he's grabbing terrible little holds on terrible little feet and putting a lot of stress through his fingers. And that's what training is. It's putting stress where you want an adaptation. So you can still get a lot of benefit from just climbing. And I think people tend to not take that into account as if they're separate things.
Absolutely. Yeah, I completely agree. That is something I definitely see people will. And that was one thing that was confusing about all these articles I read was Lilu. That was the name of the character. All the articles I read, they wouldn't describe how much you were like climbing. There were a lot of articles that were like, oh, hangboard, 3 to 5 days a week.
Right.
Yeah, that was a very common prescription. Unless you are not rock climbing at all, I don't program hangs for more than 2 days a week for anyone. Like I've not seen a benefit for it. Like there are definitely people who are like, hey, I can climb 2 sessions a week. And it's like, okay, cool. Like, and for them, 3 a week, that can be totally fine. But for people who are climbing 3, 4, 5 sessions a week, no, I'm not going to have you hang like 5 days a week. That's insane.
Yeah. And that sort of leads me into my next one, which is I still really like the old like Ava Lopez, 10-second hangs, 3-minute rests. First do a block on, a large edge with heavy weight, and then a block with a minimum edge approach.
Mm-hmm.
And that's something that I feel pretty comfortable putting into training programs up to 3 days a week. I'll program it just before they start bouldering hard, and it's so low volume, a small time commitment. And I think, and this is a thing I think isn't considered very often as well, I think especially for the like V4, V5 climber, 512 climber, most of them, and I'm generalizing here, but most of them can't reach the intensity levels high enough to really tax them neurologically.
Mm-hmm.
Like they just don't have that level of grit and just willingness to do it. Most of them. Some do for sure. Some can go a muerte, just immediately when they start climbing. But I think most of them are not getting that. So it's not overly taxing them to be able to put that super low volume hang in. And for me, I know lots of people argue about the 10-second duration of those hangs. Like, that's not pure strength. You need a 3 to 5 seconds. That's the sweet spot.
Yeah.
But for me, I don't care. I don't care if it's pure strength or pure power or strength endurance, or I don't give a fuck what you think that's targeting. I know what it does for me and what I've seen it do for other people. And the benefit of those 10-second hangs is there's a little more of a psychological element where you're teaching that grit, that willingness to hang on those last few seconds that I've never felt with a 3 or 5 second hang.
That's why they like them.
That's why they like them. I know. And I want, especially people who are going outside and climbing and, have limited time to get a thing done. I want that psychological adaptation as well. So I still really like those. And there's just a lot of evidence behind them. I've seen them work lots and lots of times. Are they the optimal way to train your fingers? I have no fucking idea. And neither does anyone else, really. So I see them be effective. I put them in people's programs.
Yeah. And I think, it's easy to get lost down the rabbit hole of, well, what does, like, almost looking at things from an overly prescriptive mindset of, well, that isn't max strength. And the thing is, we may not be going for max strength. We're going for maximum carryover to sport. This is maybe my favorite genre of Instagram posts is some elite athlete. Oh, it's not normally them. It's some account sharing a workout from an elite athlete, but then they forget to mention who the person is, and it looks wacky. Like you had just sent one the other day, and it's funny. I actually looked back when you sent it to me. I actually had it saved because I had seen it months before, but it was like a world champion javelin thrower doing these wild, like dynamic barbell pullovers with insane weight, and a coach is like helping him so that it's more powerful.
He's like throwing this heavy barbell around. It's wild.
It's horrifying to watch, but you're just like, yeah, that's an athlete. And like I've seen like world record holder hurdleist training with like this crazy, it was like trap bar deadlift off of pins with bands, and 2 coaches helped him lift it up off the ground initially. And it looked like he's just banging the weight off the ground like super hard and fast. And the thing is, the reason why I love these is you go to the comments and it's all the people who understand what traditional bodybuilding or powerlifting looks like. And they're like, wow, this is not optimal training. And then you realize you're like, oh, these are world-class coaches and these are world-class athletes, and they're doing this to get great at their sport. It's like, yes, this sprinter is doing quarter squats to where they're dropping maybe 6 inches down and coming back up with tremendous weight. And people are like, you're not hitting depth. And it's like, no, but they're running sub 10 hundreds. Like,
yeah, exactly.
This is, and also that actually is supported by science, like quarter squats for sprinting. But I think when we look at climbing and we look at, this example of a 10-second hang, does this fit what we think is the theoretical perfect max strength range? No. But does it have great carryover to climbing from what we have seen with literally thousands of people? Yes. Yes, it does.
Yeah. Totally.
All right. So my next one is this I like a lot. This is one that I've blogged about and I have mentioned so many times, and unless I force someone to do it via them paying me to program it for them, almost no one does this. But it's the 2 hangs per session. I wrote a blog called Too Easy to Fail. Like I had started and stopped and had done so many incomplete hangboard protocols. And I was like, I just want something that I stick with, something that's so easy. It would be more embarrassing to me to not do it than it would be then it would take willpower to actually complete it.
Yeah.
So that's what it was. I was like, okay, I'm going to warm up. I'm going to climb for like 30 minutes. I'm going to go over, maybe do 1 hang on like a good edge, get my fingers warm, and then 2 10-second hangs on the smallest edge that I could hang. And that was it. I did that for at the time I wanted to increase my crimp strength. I had climbed maybe 20 double-digit boulders at this point, but if I got on a straightforward crimpy V7, it would steal my lunch money. Could not touch it. Often couldn't do moves. I was like, okay, I need to improve at crimps. So I would warm up. I would do these 2 hangs. And then I would go, my first boulder of the day would be the crimpiest thing of the day because my fingers are as warm and recruited for small holds as they could be. And then I went on with my day and I, climbed like I normally would. By the end of that year, I wasn't falling on V7 crimp climbs anymore. And I flashed Finger Hut, which is a crimpy V10, and I did Swiss Chris Mix Second Go, which is like a very notoriously crimpy, straightforward V10.
Yeah.
All I was doing was 2 hangs per session. And I mean, like, what's comical is like I would tell people would like see this over the progression of, it was like, maybe 6 or 8 months. I had multiple people be like, dude, what are you doing? You're like starting to look good on crimps. I'd be like, it's so easy. All I'm doing is just 2 hangs. And I would walk them to the hangboard and show them the same response every time. They're like, that's it? I'm like, yeah, that's it. They're like, oh, okay. Never tried it. I was like, wait, you're telling me it's too easy for you to do? I mean, but yeah. And what's comical is I look back and I was using the moonboard edges. Realistically, I started at like 12 mil. And that was, I could barely hang on for like 4 seconds. And I kept it going until it was like a casual 12 seconds. Then I dropped to, honestly, what is probably like 10 mil. And like initially it was like, oh, I could barely hold on for like 3 seconds. And then I just kept going. And I remember testing just before I left for my trip to go out to Joe's, and I could hang it for like 30 seconds. But yeah, I never went more than 10 seconds. And looking at the time, I couldn't explain why it worked so well. Because I was like, I have no idea. I was making the mistake you had just mentioned of I wasn't looking at this holistically with my rock climbing. I was like, 2 hangs shouldn't be enough time under tension to build strength.
Right.
But that didn't matter. What it was doing is it was recruiting me to crimp harder for the rest of my session. Also, I think there is something that goes into hanging on small edges that really like gets coordination, essentially, for lack of better words, for just grabbing and hanging small edges. Like, I will say this. When I see, like, you can tell how well people climb on small holds when you watch them do pull-ups on them. Like, when I watch someone who just like murks hard crimp problems do pull-ups on like 10 mil, you're like, oh, like, it's so smooth, it's fluid, there's no like jerkiness, they're not like pausing to like, handle the change in load. They're able to do this really smooth, really coordinated, and they've been able, like, their hands just understand the timing of moving around on small crimps. And I think hanging on small edges, I think some body weight repeaters that don't even have to be hard can do this, and pull-ups can do this. But for me, and I think this is a great protocol for anyone who they're not looking for the optimal, best, perfect way to do it. They're just like, man, I just want to kind of stop feeling like a piece of shit and actually hangboard for the first time in my life, like I was. Warm up, do 2 hard hangs on an edge that's kind of small and hard that you can hang for between 5 and 10 seconds. When that suddenly feels too easy to justify, drop slightly smaller and just keep going.
Yeah, one of my others is sort of a progression on that, and it has a progression built into it as well. You can do it either on a hangboard or on a bouldering wall, and that's essentially on a hangboard. They're more like offset hangs or offset pulls, where I'm going to have one hand on a better hold and one hand on a hold that I otherwise can't use.
Yeah.
And then I'm going to, play with like pulling into different positions on those holds. Just, for a few seconds, up to 10 seconds or so, I might pull up to the right hand. I might typewriter over, just playing around with it with one hand on a really bad hold that you don't believe in and the other on a pretty good hold that you do. And then on a bouldering wall, it's more positional, where I'm going to grab one really bad hold and get into a position that I'm like, I can't hold this position, but then I'm going to grab a good hold with the other hand to allow me to hold that position. And then I'm going to try to move my arms in some way, whether it's pulling up or pulling over or whatever, just to build the belief in that terrible hold and understand that you can actually use that if given the right scenario. And I mean, it's an old method. I think I first read about this in probably, I don't know, 1994 or something, 95, in a magazine. Somebody talking about to train for their route, they would go to the crag and just pull onto the starting holds and do pull-ups on the starting holds, or do typewriters on the starting holds of this ridiculously hard boulder problem. Or, I heard crack climbers doing it in finger locks and shit like that.
Yeah.
So it's an old method, but I think it works, and it gives you some real confidence in tough positions and using really bad holds.
Yes. Yeah. So this is one I actually wasn't going to bring up because I don't have a lot of experience with programming it, but over this summer, I've done like a bunch of 2-arm hangs, bunch of repeaters, bunch of 1-arm hangs. But over the summer, I was like, okay, I'm going to throttle back on like protocols. I was focusing on 4-arm hypertrophy, which went fucking great. And
you got Big Fred to call 4-arms now.
I don't know if I told you this. I grew both forearms 3/4 of an inch over 14 weeks.
That's quite a bit.
And though this killed me to do, I did 0 brachioradialis work. Like, it kills me because that absolutely would have inflated the number, but also that's why I didn't do it. I wanted to make sure it was purely from finger and wrist flexors, and maybe some extensor, but extensors aren't going to grow that much. But next time I'm absolutely doing some brachioradialis work because I want those big old like bat wings.
Fred Jr. forearms.
Exactly. But before I was climbing, so I would do my sessions, and to help me get recruited for projecting, I was doing what you just described. I would grab one bad hold, one decent hold, and I would typewriter back and forth. And so here's the thing about using bad holds on rock climbs. So many people get so hyper-focused on the absolute worst hold that they forget they have another arm. They forget that they have 2 feet below them that can take weight. People will use this phrase, well, if you can't hold the hold, you can't do the move. It's like, well, do you have to hold the hold? What's the rest of your body doing? Because the rest of your body doesn't have to hold the hold. And this is one of my favorite things to teach in person. Like, it is one of my favorite light bulb moments to see go off for people, for them to be like, holy shit, I've got 4 limbs. Like, I can do so much more. But this exercise of typewriting back and forth does 2 things. I think one, it helps you kind of load the single arm pretty well, like in a controlled fashion, but it also teaches you to use your other arm when using bad holds. Because especially if your bad hold is bad enough, you have to use the other arm, otherwise it's impossible. And what was super interesting was I was just doing that. And for me, normally to do like 1-arm hangs on edges, I kind of got to be like, I have to be pretty sharp. I've got to be like training consistently. But I was doing these typewriters, and then like one time I was like, dude, this kind of feels really good. And I typewriter over and was able to just drop my other hand on an edge that for me is like normally very hard to hang one-armed.
Yeah.
So I will say this is something I don't have enough experience to say I recommend it, but the fact that you recommend it, I can absolutely say that for me anecdotally, I thought that there was really something to this, and it's something I plan on exploring more.
Yeah, I've done it quite a bit. When I was training on that bare naked hangboard that I built at my little house in Cincinnati, I did a lot of this where I would use like 2 fingers on the terrible little 6 mil edge, and then 4 fingers on the good one, and try to pull through those 2 fingers as much as I could. And I did a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. I think there's absolutely some value there. So next one I'm going to bring up is 6 and 10 repeaters. This one was popularized by Will Anglin. 6 seconds on, 10 seconds off for reps of 5. I like using like 3 total sets for 1 grip, and then maybe 1 to 2 for your accessory grip. Now this one I don't program often. I think it's, from what I've seen, one of the more beneficial for max finger strength. But man, it just absolutely tanks you. Like, this is something that if people are like, hey, my work season's getting really busy, I'm going to get to the gym once a week, but I have a hangboard at home, I'm throwing this at them. It's absolutely, it works great. Will's explained it really well as far as loading protocols in his blog, Hangboarding a Way. So I won't repeat myself here or repeat him here, but I will bring up two different mistakes that I see people have with hangboarding that come along with repeaters. The very first one is how we measure progress in hangs. And there's kind of two different problems that come up. One, you need to be using the exact same measuring tool every time. So I will see people do, I remember back when like Facebook community pages were super popular and people would talk about their training a lot. There was this one guy who kept posting and he'd be like, oh, just did this new hangboard protocol and I added 30 pounds to each hand.
Right.
It's like, yo, chill, Yves. Like, you know, what are you doing over there? And then like 3 months later, he'd be like, new hangboard protocol, just added like 21 pounds to both hands. And I was like,
yeah,
are you now the strongest human on earth? And this kept happening. And what it took time to realize was he would use a new protocol, maybe 1 second repeaters. And because you have like anytime you do a new program, you are going to get strong. Like you're going to get stronger at that exercise for a minimum of 6 weeks. Like it has to be terrible for you to not see improvements.
Yep.
Which means, but the thing is, how transferable are those benefits? That's an important question. Like just because you get good at one silly exercise doesn't mean it's going to make everything else good. It also, those gains might not be persistent, which means they may not stick around for very long. And it turned out he was just changing protocols a ton. You know, he'd be like, oh, I added 15 pounds to both hands on my new hangboard protocol, which was ring finger, motto, you know, lawnmower pulls. And it's like, oh, okay.
And just to illustrate really quickly, I just did some testing 3 days ago. And I tested with the same edge, with a 10 deck. I was just looking for peak force.
Mm-hmm.
And the difference between like a 120 degree bend in my elbow and straight armed in one hand was 12 pounds and in the other hand was 20 pounds.
Totally believe that.
And actually 25 pounds now that I look at it. So something as simple as testing at a different angle of your arm can make a huge difference. I didn't get 20 pounds stronger in the 3 minutes between those two hangs, but that's how it showed up.
Totally. So whenever you're testing, making sure, like, do different protocols and like measure how you're progressing in those protocols. But when we are actually trying to see, did I improve, either have one method that you use, whether that's like a hangboard. 10 decks are great because they're quick, easy, whatever. You can also use like benchmark boulders. So if you have a home wall or if you have a spray wall, if you have a commercial board, like, you know, tension board, have really fingery problems. You can record yourself over the years. Super helpful. But have the same method that you use so that you can compare truly apples to apples.
Yeah. I'll also add another mistake people make with repeaters is like sport climbers really, really love them and love to do them while they're also sport climbing a lot. And I think that's, you know, that goes back to the mistake of not taking your climbing into account when you're doing your hangboarding. If you're doing high volume climbing already, it's going to be pretty tough to do a good cycle of repeaters and be recovered for actual anything. So you have to be pretty careful if you're one of those, like what Eric Hurst calls pump lust people, because you probably love repeaters.
Yes. Yeah. No, I completely agree. You know, and there's an issue I see that happens really often with people. Steve Bechtel had popularized the idea of, what did he call it where you hangboard when you lift? Integrated strength training.
Integrated strength training.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So we popularized this idea of integrated strength training, which is basically just superset the two. Which is great. Save time. You got to stand around for a couple minutes anyways between hangs, might as well, or between lifts, might as well hang. The issue that ends up coming up is that people will be like, oh, like I need to separate things out. They hear this concept in sports science to where you need to, the more you can separate out your workouts, the better you're going to be able to do for each of them. Like, so do lower volume but higher frequency. And so they'll be like, oh, I'll climb this day. The next day I'll lift and do hangs. And then I'll maybe do some endurance the next day. And then I'll rest and then I'll repeat it. And then you're like, well, damn, you're loading your fingers 7 or 6 days a week. And there is this concept called consolidation of stressors, which basically just means if there is one linchpin that holds your sport together, sometimes it's better not to spread it out. A classic example of this is, let's say you wanted to squat 405 pounds and run a sub-3 marathon in the same week, and you're going to train for this. Some people might be like, well, we need to separate these things out. So I'll lift 3 days a week and I'll run 4 days a week.
Right.
You are now using your legs 7 days a week. You're going to have terrible progress. So even though it goes against this idea of, higher frequency, lower volume, and like spreading things out, you're going to be way better off being like, okay, 3 of those lifting days, I'm going to run, like I'll maybe run in the morning and lift at night, something like that. And then I'm actually going to get true rest days worked in. So how this applies to climbing is our hands. Our hands are the funnel that everything has to run through, for better or for worse. In one way, this is great because a little bit of hand strength, a little bit of hand endurance or capacity carries over to so much of this sport. But the downside is anytime you use your hands, you are taking from somewhere else.
Yeah.
So people will tell me, they're like, oh, I'm absolutely stuck. I can't make progress. And I look at what they're doing and it's like, well, you're limit boarding today. Tomorrow you're hangboarding. The next day you're doing endurance. Like, honestly.
And then you're max deadlifting, which is also going to tax your grip.
This last year I started using straps to lift with.
Yeah.
Biggest hit to my ego, but let me tell you, greatest thing. Like, I don't love throwing around the phrase junk mileage a lot, but like, yeah, a lot of just like lifting, throwing around dumbbells and lifting a barbell for deadlifting, junk mileage. Like, why not let your forearms rest? But fascinating enough, with, I'd mentioned Mark Anderson earlier, when he did shadow boxing, 14D, he went on the Training Beta podcast and he was like, I changed up my training from what was in the book. And comically, his success here is what ended up kind of dooming their book, because people were like, oh, he changed it. Book's useless. Like, could not disagree with that more. Maybe like comically, like all the principles in the book, still amazing. And in fact, if you read the book, I found this so interesting. He actually outlined in the book what he would later discover to do to train for shadow boxing. Because I went back, reread the book, and then re-listened to his episode, and I was like, oh, you talked about this as an option. But what he ended up doing, and he was like, I don't know why this works, but it does. He was basically just combining 3 days of training into one 4.5-hour super session, and then he would take multiple days off.
Yeah.
He was like, look, I tried separating these things out, but now instead I warm up with arcing, I do my campus boarding, I do my limit bouldering, then I do power endurance, and then I take a couple days off. He's like, I can't tell you why this is working, but I tried splitting them across the week, didn't do anything for me. Like, I got worse results. And I think this comes down to this idea of consolidation of stressors. Like, you need rest. Our hands need to recover. So I think a lot of people who feel like they're doing the right thing based on, what seems like good practices, spreading things out further, what they're doing is they're just making themselves tired and not capable of recovering from the workouts they're doing.
Yeah, if you're taking the advice of, 6 different isolated studies that say it's best to not do this along with this, and it's best not to do this along with this, no one has that kind of time or energy unless you're a professional athlete who can work your entire schedule around optimizing these things. 9 times out of 10 with my clients, it comes down to where can we fit it?
Mhm.
What, and then if we have a tough time fitting it, do we need it? So that like once a week super session, I think that's a fantastic way to go. I mean, that's basically how I'm living right now. Like I get one day to go climbing, maybe 2 if I'm lucky a week. And generally it's like just a few hours. We will run out to the crag, get 2 burns on the project. I come back home, I do some heavy hangs, and then I jump on the bouldering wall and try some hard projects. And then I get on the campus board and I do these, there's no protocol to it, but these things I've been doing like foot on 1, 4, 7s on the power strips on the tiny little edges, because that's the style I need to get better at. I sort of do a repeater version of those with my feet on in one day. And that's what I have time for. It's where I can fit it, and it's making me feel better.
Yeah. I mean, I think there's absolutely something to that. We can look to some sports, like CrossFit's a good example of a sport that can really benefit from breaking things apart a lot, because there's a million things they do. Like you can run, you can swim, you can lift, you can do whatever. But climbing, that funnels everything through your hands, I think it's a mistake to try and break things apart too much.
Yeah, I agree. My last one here moves towards strength endurance, maybe a little bit, but that's another version of a repeater, which is 5 on, 55 off.
Mm-hmm.
And the way I'd like to do these is 3 fingers alternating, front 3 and back 3.
Mm.
And I just honestly think 3-finger hangboarding is such a missed opportunity for so many people who are like, if you'd get your pinky on, you'd be way stronger. You don't always have that opportunity to have your pinky on. So if you're going to hit a hold and your pinky doesn't get on, or if there's not room for your pinky, do you want to be screwed? I don't, so I'm going to go front 3, back 3, front 3, back 3. I do these weighted. The 55 seconds gives me enough time to switch weights if I need to from front 3 to back 3. And then I do another cycle of them on small holds instead of doing them weighted. So for me, this is a really fantastic one, and it's pretty fast.
Yeah, I believe that. So I actually have in my bonus front 3 half crimps. I think not even like, I think your point absolutely is correct in that, like, you're going to hit holds incorrectly, but not only that, our pinkies, we just have very different pinky lengths. All of us do. And everyone, my favorite thing is whenever someone's like, I have short pinkies. I'm like, yes, we all do. But some people truly...
Welcome to the human race.
Yes. Some people have very, very short pinkies. Like, unless they're full crimping, it's not going to touch the wall. But there are certain pinky lengths that honestly they do a lot of heavy pulling when you are directly under a hold, dragging. Like, they can passively just hang a tremendous amount of weight. And I've worked with people, and I've consulted with plenty of people who will be like, man, my max hang numbers are tremendous, but I just don't feel as good on the wall, especially if I'm gripping certain holds. And I'll ask a mix of questions, but one is, how strong are you when your pinky comes off? And especially, how strong are you in a front 3 half crimp hang? So often they'll be like, like if my pinky comes off, I come off. And I think it's really easy to become dependent on that passive drag that happens from the pinky. And I can't think of any time I've met someone who was strong in a front 3 half crimp who wasn't just strong on the wall. Like,
totally.
I believe the reason it's not tested for more often, honestly, it's a little like, we talk about hangboarding being safe, but man, front 3 half crimp is your ring finger lets you know it exists when you're doing those. You're totally like, oh, okay, feeling things. If y'all incorporate front 3 half crimps, take it slow. go like take weight off if you need to. You cannot progress those too slowly, frankly. But man, for me, like the grip that carries over to outdoor performance better than anything for myself and for my clients is front three half crimp.
Yeah. And I think, since I've been doing this Written in Stone podcast, I've been looking back to like where things started, trying to see the origin of some of these ideas and things. And I just did an episode talking about Hubble versus Action Direct, which is the first 9A.
Mm-hmm.
And Hubble being upgraded to 9A sort of comes back to Adam Ondra being the first to suggest it. And I think he's also the culprit in the your pinky really matters conversation because of that one video where he's like, can you get your pinky on? I love my pinky. And then, sort of everybody latched onto that. And he made this Instagram post that was like, pinkies are so important. But the funny thing is, in the photo on his Instagram post, he's in back three. And I'm like, so does that mean your index finger isn't important? What are you trying to say here? And everyone just points to that. Like, well, Adam Ondra says it. Adam Ondra says it. Yeah, I can show you 100 photos of Adam Ondra with his pinky off. You can't always get it on. That's silly. Is it an important part of the equation? Sure, but not for every hold.
Yes, this is a time when context matters, because if you look at the full clip or read the full interview on that when he talks about it, he was saying that his pointer finger was just getting shredded and he really needed it for the crux crimp. So he would just only crimp things back three, like a few of the sharp holds, so that he could save the skin on his pointer finger. And that's why he needed the pinky on, which is very different than saying, always keep your pinky on. Like, it is such a rarity that you're like, oh, I need to protect this one finger. Let me take it off for other holds. Like, you're a rare breed if you're doing that.
Yeah. I've said this before on this podcast, but I have a whole folder on Instagram called Pinky Drop that I save posts in. And every time now someone says, you'd be a lot stronger if you'd use your pinky, I just bombard them with photos from I just send them like 50 direct messages of photos of pros with their pinkies off.
Here are the next people you need to DM.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. All right. So my last one, and this is kind of more of the protocol, essentially. Like, this is the protocol. I'm going to be a tiny bit more thorough with how I think it should be done. And because it also just includes a few mistakes, but more or less max hang workout, whatever edge size you want, 15, 20 mil, both are nice. 10 can be good for some people, but for a lot of people that's skin dependent or just too hard. I like doing three to four warm-up hangs. If someone's really strong, hasn't warmed up well, or they just take a long time to warm up, 4 warm-up hangs is great of progressively loading heavier. And then 3 hard hangs. For these, I like 6 seconds, frankly, because I'm lazy and I don't like to fight. Also, I do find that going under 8 seconds seems to be a little less taxing. So if I want someone to be able to crimp really hard, like next, if for me it's like, ooh, finger strength's important, but you spending time on crimpy boulders is really important. I like these shorter hangs. If climbing on super crimpy boulders isn't as much of an issue, I'll push the hangs closer to 8 to 10 seconds. But with these, there's a few things that are important to keep in mind. First is this concept of auto-regulation. And with the warm-up hangs, let's say, so my last max hang protocol, I, in the end, was working up to 110 pounds of weight added. So my warm-up hangs would be, and for this, I needed at least 4 warm-up hangs because that's a lot of weight on me. So my shoulders and hands needed the work. So I would do plus 25, 50, 75, 100. So and that would be my warm-up. So I would get within 10 pounds of my max working weight. And as I'd go along, I would take note. Literally, I just keep a notepad on me of 1 out of 10, how's this feel? And if I hit, let's say, that 100, that 4th warm-up, and I'm like, yikes, that felt like a 9 out of 10, I'm going to repeat that again. And that will be my first of the 3 heavy working hangs. And man, sometimes it's like, well, you know what? Today we're staying at 100. That's just simply how it's going to be. But then a lot of times, that first one, it'll be like, oh, this is rough. You do it again and it's like, oh, I just needed a little more time to warm up. Like maybe I didn't sleep as well, whatever. And then I can work up to my working weight for the day and keep going. So using this little bit of auto regulation is good because sometimes you're just going to come in and not feel 100, but you can still get quality work in at whatever a good difficulty feels like for you that day. So I like that a lot for the warm up. And then I think there's this common misconception around the idea of progressive overload in climbing or in hangboarding in particular, because people want linear progression. They're like, well, I want to keep adding weight. And if I can't add weight, that means I plateaued. But the way we should be looking, especially for advanced hangboarders, we should be looking at progressive overload from mesocycle to mesocycle, or every 4 to 6 week blocks, essentially, in less pretentious terms. So what that'll end up looking like is maybe for my max hangs, I'm starting week 1 plus 80 pounds. And over the next 4 weeks, I'm going to work up to 110. And let's say that was my max. I'm going to try and nudge past it and see, can I go up? Can I hit 112 and a half? Can I hit 115? Then I take my deload. Let's say I added 5 pounds. I hit 115. Instead of starting again at 80, I'll start at 85. And so now my goal is to keep nudging things up, maybe 5 pounds cycle to cycle. And for bigger lifts, like maybe you're going 10. If you're super advanced, maybe you're going 2.5. But what I see a lot of people do is they do their first hangboard cycle and they'll be like, oh, I went from plus 30 pounds to plus 60. And then when they try and start over again, they go right back to plus 60. And they're like, I feel completely stuck. And it's like, yeah, you're training like a 15-year-old bro who is trying to max out their bench press every single time they come into the gym. We don't want to be hitting 100%. Like, I wish we had named max hangs something different, because it makes you think maximum or like 1 rep max or max effort, but it's not max effort. But yeah, so I think I like that protocol. Max hangs, 3 to 4 warm up hangs, 3 heavy hangs, roughly 6 seconds, 2 to 3 minutes in between. Start easy at the start of your cycle, run 4 or 5 weeks, add weight as you go. Then at the end, kick it back, go back up. I've given this to multiple climbers in the V14, 15, and even V16 range who continue to see progress from it. And man, if it works for them, it's probably working for most of us.
Yeah, totally. Doesn't need to be super complicated. You don't need to put a ton of thought into how you're doing it. Just choose the thing that makes sense. Take into account your climbing, take into account your schedule and your available energy, and then try a thing for a while. Yeah. And I try something until you stop seeing progress. Yeah. Like, truly, I gave a climbing partner that protocol I just explained. They do things just absolute, like, they listened perfectly, like way better than I ever would. Jesus. I was like, yeah, keep doing this until you stop seeing progress. And they just kept going. They added 65 pounds to their half crimp. And it took 1.5 years. And then they were like, hey, Nate, so here's where I'm at. And I was like, Jesus Christ, you're good. You did it. Like, cool. Like, yeah, that's it. I don't know many people who have truly seen the end results of a hangboard protocol and been like, hey, I've done this. And then I had a full phase where I didn't progress using all the ideas that we talked about today. That's super rare. Yeah, totally. I don't know if we added to the confusion or helped streamline things here. But I think, like you alluded to in the beginning, there are people who like to make the bread, and there are people who like to buy the bread. So this is going to be useful to somebody out there, I hope, I'm sure. And check out Nate's YouTube. You've got 5 or 6 things on there now, right? Ooh, I might be up to like 10 now. Oh, really? Yeah. I'm hitting them once a week. Wow, my count keeping is bad here. Oh, no worries. yeah, so quite a few videos up there now. So check that out. If you haven't yet, check out my new podcast, Written in Stone. Currently, we're on our third story. We've got, I think, 11 for this season, and lots of heavy hitters coming onto the podcast later this season. People are psyched about it, so check it out. And you know where to find us, powercompanyclimbing.com. On Instagrams, the Facebooks, though I don't really do shit on Facebook, to be honest. But that's where we're at. You can find the training plans, courses, products, all sorts of things at powercompanyclimbing.com. Learn, grow, excel.
Maybe don't know.
This time, this time, this time, this time, this time to fix. This time to fix. This time to fix. This time